Okay, the next thing we're going to do is getting back to this problem of implementing the word count function, but this time we're doing the part where our boss came to us and said, well, what we need now is we need that word count function to handle a string that represents the file name that contains the document, so we're not being given the document itself as a string. And because of that, we know here that instead of taking the document as an input parameter, we're going to take the file name as an input parameter. But from what we know so far, that's still going to be taken in as a string, and then we need to read that file. But one thing to say about this solution, of course, is that this is the wrong solution. I don't want to belabor this, but in functional programming, we never throw exceptions like that because exceptions short circuit our algebraic equations and blow up blueprints, so we never do that. Instead, as I note here, your now algebraic oriented brain should be thinking that we're going to need to change this previous function signature. And again, this was from our initial solution where we took in the document as a string to something else. And now we want to use one of these functional error handling types of option, try, or either. And then we have two questions. First one is, which one are we going to use? And then the second question is, what goes inside this area right here? Jumping right to the solution, we're going to use try. And I believe I mentioned that in previous videos. So option isn't really good solution for reading from files because when you read from a file or you try to access network resources or anything like that that throws an exception, the call overview function is probably going to want to have access to that exception. So you're either going to want to use try or either. And I'm just going to use try because the types are just a little bit simpler, as you can see here. With try, you just have this one type here. And with either, you have two types. So I just want to start with try just because it's a little bit simpler. And now if we focus on try down here for a moment, the question again is what goes inside of that try declaration. And so if you think about that, what you want to return is actually the success case information right here inside that try. So the caller of WC still wants this vector map, but we're going to wrap it inside of a try. And I show that here. And just to be clear, what you put inside of try is the success case data type. And because the original word count function returns this vector map, this is going to be the type signature that we return from our new function. And just as a brief aside, as I note in the book, to be thorough with our error handling options, option would be declared in the same way. So you wrap an option around this vector map right here. And then either could be declared in multiple ways. So I show a couple of possibilities here. This is one where either returns a throwable in the left position and the vector map success value in the right position. You could also return an exception here. You could return a string or anything else you want in this left position. But again, you return the success value in that right position. Again, I want to stress that I just want to focus on sketching the solution at first, and then we can think about implementing the solution later. So the first step in this process is I want to rename the top level function. It used to be named WC, and now I want to change it to WC from file. So let's go ahead and push this over to the side here. And then what I have going on over here is I created a new file, so I call this one word count with the file app.scala. And I just copied and pasted our previous word count code into here. And what I want to do is start modifying this code. Then if I come to the terminal, you can see the files that I have here. I still have the word count. Oh, I also renamed word count.scala to wordcountutils.scala. So this is where all of our utilities are that we created previously. And now what I'm going to do is focus on this file, and I just want to start by compiling this. So we'll go ahead and compile that with Scala CLI and its watch option right there. And then I'll scoot that down just to make sure we can see the output. So the first step in this is we need to get rid of this document stuff because we don't have a document anymore. What we have now is a file name. And that file name is, I think I named it test file. And now what's going on is instead of doing this part here where we call word count directly, now we want to call this word count from file. And we want to pass in that file name. And instead of being a word count map, this is going to be what I might call a maybe word count map. And then down here, we need to do something to handle this maybe word count map. So let's just put that as a question mark right now and just say we want to handle word count map here. And that's good enough for now. And if I save that, we should start seeing error messages down there. Perfect. That's exactly what we want. Okay, sorry about that. I got interrupted, and hopefully I'm picking up where I left off. So what I think I was doing was creating this function right here, or thinking about sketching this function, and it was going to return a value over here. And let me just add that right now. So we're thinking about this is going to be a vector map, and it was going to contain string and int types over here. So that's what I'm expecting there. And because this is a try, we'll think about handling that result over here. And I save that. And of course, down here, you see that that fails because this function doesn't exist yet. So let's think about starting to sketch that function. We'll come over to word count utils, come down to the bottom. And this is where I had the original word count function up here. So we could just copy that one, that type signature right there, bring it down here. And I want to call that word count from file. Instead of taking a document, that's going to be a file name. And as we discussed, instead of that return type, it's going to be a try wrapped around that. And now we can think about sketching what we need down here. So as you can imagine, the first thing you want to do is read the file contents into a string. And because that can fail, we can think about saying, well, maybe read the file contents into a string. And then after that, all we have to do is say, well, what I want to do is word count on those file contents right down here. And that will return what we want. But we can't quite do that yet. So let me just focus on this. So how about we just say, how about val maybe contents equal, I want to read a file. And so I'm going to pass in that file name. And now I expect that function to return a try for all the reasons that I mentioned before. And that's because anytime you try to access something in the outside world, such as a file or a network resource, it can fail. So what I'm expecting from that function is a try of string right there. So that's why I call this one maybe contents. And then down here, we'll need to handle maybe contents to somehow work with that WC function. So we'll come back to that. So this is the first step, and let me delete that comment now. So it's really just two steps: read the file, and then somehow or another work with word count to return what we need. And as I save that, you'll see a bunch of errors, and one of those is because read file doesn't exist. And I could implement read file in this file, but this is called word count utils, and really this is a file related thing. So a better thing to do would be to come over here and say, well, I want to create a new file, and we'll call that one fileutils.scala, and then I can close that. And now I want to put this in a different place. So how about we do this, because file utilities are so general, I just want to put this in a different location. I could just say that. And again, I'm putting this in this package because reading files is such a general utility. I want to be able to use it in any of my applications. And now what I'm thinking is I want an object called fileutils. And inside that, I want this function that's going to be called readFile. It's going to take that file name as input, and it's going to return that try of string as a result. And we can do the usual thing where we start with 3 question marks right there. I think that's actually going to be a little bit of a problem as we try to sketch this solution, but let's go ahead and start with that. And the problem you run into is when you're trying to compile code like this, I'm now trying to access this read file function, and read file is not implemented with this right here. This, again, works. It's great for sketching. It can also be great for compiling, but once you start accessing it in other code, that's when things start falling apart. So the best thing I can do for our sanity actually is to go ahead and implement this one. And I just happen to have that code over here, so bear with me just a moment. Okay, so what I just did was I just implemented this read file function right here. And to do that, let's take a look at the code real quick. So again, it's taking the file name as a string, returning this type here. This guy right here is interesting. It's called using, and it's an object under Scala.util. And it's really interesting. What it does is it closes the resources for you automatically. So if you've worked with files before, you know that you'll have something like val source equals something, and then there might be like a buffered source over here, something like that. And then later on in your code, there's going to be some try-catch stuff, and then there's going to be a finally clause, and then inside this finally clause right there, you're going to do a source.close. And that's what using does for you automatically, is it calls this part inside this finally clause right here. And that makes using really interesting to us. So let me get rid of that part right there. And I think it imported that for us. Let's get rid of that. So that's all that using does right there, is it's going to close source for us, but it also gives us this reader here. So if you've worked with files before, you know that what you do is you take the file name, you can pass it into a file reader, and then for larger files especially, you want to pass it into a buffered reader. So that's what this reader variable is right here, is it's coming out of using. And then we can use reader inside the body of our function right here. And again, a cool thing is that reader is closed automatically for us by using. So now we can focus on the inside here. And what I'm doing is just creating a temporary variable here. And now I use the Scala iterator. And this is one possible way to read files. There's probably, 5 to 50 different ways to read files in Scala. And this is one possible way that I discovered recently. I think I found this in the Scala doc actually for the using type. So if you look that up, I think you'll find part of this code at least in there. So this uses the iterator type here, and this is a continually function. So if I hover over that, you'll see the help text on that. And it says that it creates an infinite length iterator, returning the results of evaluating expression. And the only thing important for us is that what we're doing right here is we're reading every line in the file, dealing with that as an iterator, and then we take each line until we get to the null line at the end of the file. And that's when the reading stops, and then we'll have this res variable here. And the only thing you have to do with res is then convert that into a string. And you have to add the new line characters back in here. And again, I'm doing that because I want a string result, or a try of string right here, which is that's another important thing to say, is that when you're using, you're going to always get the result as a try right there. So this result, if I put another one over here, I could call it one res2 equals that. You can see that its type is a string, so that's what we're returning here. And I'll just get rid of that temporary variable, and we'll save that. So again, this is an implementation of a read file function. And even though this was an aside, this is actually handled in a functional way, because we're always making sure that we close our resource, and then we're returning that result in a try, again, because this can potentially fail. And now, assuming that this works properly, we never have to come back to it, and we can come back over here. And the error message over here is that I need to import that. So I will come back over here and say import com.alvinalexander.utils.fileutils right there like that. And actually I need the .read file, so that will help with that. Come down here, save that, and that error message should go away. And you can see there's some errors underneath these try types here, those red squiggly lines, and that is because I did not import that. Import scala.util. And I want to do try, success, and failure. I feel like I might need all those. So we'll do that. And scroll back down here and save that. Now those error messages go away, and if we look down here, we still have some errors. And of course we know that because we need to do something here with maybe contents. So what we want to do is we want to deal with maybe content. And one way I've shown to do this so far is with a match expression. So I'm going to show this. I'm going to show a better solution shortly. But let's just think about what we would do if we were using a match expression. So maybe contents contains this string right here. So in the success case, this is going to have a string, and I'll call that S. And then we want to deal with that string over here in this area. And this is kind of an awkward situation, because what I want to do, actually, the solution would be to pass that string into word count, right? Like that. The problem with that is that this result does not match this result. So what you'd have to do in this case is put another success over here and say, well, this is the success case right there. And that's how you'd handle that one. And then the failure case, let's go ahead and deal with that one. And that's going to be a throwable, so we can call it one T. And then we just say, well, I want to rethrow that basically as a failure. So that's kind of some weird and bulky code. That will compile, but it's not a very elegant solution. And indeed, what we can do is not do that. And what we could say here is just maybe contents. And this is an interesting one if you think about it. So we have a try of string. And what I want to say is if I have a string, what I want to do is convert that string into this vector map here by calling word count on it. Or you might say that I want to transform this string into this vector map. So anytime you think about the word transform or even the word convert, you should think about map. That should be the first thing that comes to your mind in the Scala world. And you can think, well, what I want to do, again, is I want to transform that string into the vector map. And of course, we do that by passing that string into word count. And that's actually the solution for that. And you can see that because the error messages go away. But if you want to see it with types, then we could do something like this and say val res equal that, and then res like that. And now you can see here from the hover text that res has this type, try a vector map, a string, and int. So in this particular case, I will get rid of that temporary variable and just say that this is our solution right there. So I save that, and again, this is our solution for word count reading from a file. And now when I look at the error messages down here and this color up here, I can imagine that one thing it's saying is that it cannot find the type. I click that and it says cannot find the type try. So of course now we need to have try up here. So we can say import scala.util. And I will import all of those again, try, success, and failure. And you see that error message go away right there. And now we do need to handle this over here. And now, because we haven't gotten into all the details about how to print output in a functional style, I'm just going to handle this maybe with that match expression. So now we can say case success, and this value here is going to be that vector map. So we can do that, and I could just say for a simple case like that, I could just say print the map, and then we could say the failure case, of course. And here I might do something like system.error.println, and then t.get message. So now when I save that, and then I don't see any output down here. Oops, and that's because I was doing compile instead of run. And that's because I was doing compile instead of run. So I want to do run or just dot and then dash dash watch. And what that's saying is that you have multiple main methods in this directory. So I want to do main class and then equals. And that's going to be in the word count package. Then I want to call word count with file app. And hopefully that will do the trick. And there we go. This is the solution right here, or at least I should say this is the desired output. It all looks just like before, where it's sorted by number of occurrences. And then I can say that this code here is the solution. And of course, that solution depends on this solution right here. And one more thing I should do to test this is to give it a bad file name. So we'll say that one does not work. And then down here, as desired, we have test file bad, no such file or directory. So that's what's coming out of this part right here. So in the first case, we saw the map printed out. And in the second case, we saw this printed out. There's a couple of points I want to touch on to wrap this up completely. One thing I may not have mentioned is that the way that map works in a case like this, where map is called on a try type, is that if you have a failure, it's going to return the exception, which you saw over here. And if you have a success, map lets you operate on the success failure like you would normally. So that's exactly what we saw in the code. And again, you think about map, whenever you think about saying, well, I want to convert a string into a map, or I want to convert a string into a vector map, whenever you think about converting or transforming one type into another type in Scala, think about using the map function. That's what it's there for. Another thing I note on the next page of the book is that if I had used either instead of try, everything would have been very similar, except our return type would look like this. And in fact, I showed that full function right here, and this one assumes that read file is returning an either instead of a try. And hopefully an interesting part is if you think about the beginning of this course, if you had looked at a type like this way back in the very first video, that might have been a little mind-blowing. But right now when you look at this, you say, well, okay, of course, I'm working with either. So the left is going to have the bad news, and the right over here is going to have the success value or the good news. So I was just thinking about that, and in roughly 20 videos, we've made this kind of progress where you can now read this kind of type, hopefully fairly simply. And the last point I want to make here is that if you think these two types are hard to read, this one with try or this one down here with either, what you can do is use the Scala 3 opaque type. And if you Google for that, you'll find some of my articles on it. But what that allows you to do is to replace these types that are shown up here with other potential types down here. So you could do something like that, where you say, well, I'm going to return a try of a map sorted by value, and then we have the word and count types here. You can do something similar there. And the final point I make down here is if you really want to take that a little bit further, you could actually have, this should be word count from file right here and not just word count, but you could have these other types here like this or like that. And that would be instead of using these types here or these types here. So all these things can be done. So it's just a matter of taste or style, I suppose. That's one thing. Judgment is another word I could use. And then these other types can be used here. So I guess maybe I just should say it's up to you and your team to decide, do you want to see something like this or do you want to see something like this? And a nice thing about Scala is having the flexibility that you can create this type of thing or this type of thing, or even this one down here. So having said all that, I hope you enjoyed this video. And as mentioned at the beginning, what we did was we created a word count function that now reads from a file instead of taking a string as input. And as a result of that, we started getting into the try type as I show in this code all along here.